Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're just going to wait another couple of minutes before we start the session. Thank you. Thank you once again to everybody for joining us. We're just going to wait another minute or so before we begin. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening all. A very warm welcome on behalf of the Maximise Your Time team to the CHS Exchange Conference 2021. We are very much looking forward to supporting you over the next few days. We're delighted to offer international sign interpretation for all of our plenary sessions, as well as live closed captioning in English. To download and enable the live closed captioning overlay, click on the URL pasted in the comments box, select Download Text on Tap Overlay, add the event ID CHS, all lowercase, and select View as Overlay. You will then need to add the following access code E53J45UJ and then capital C and F, and it's all going to be in the chat box for you. This should only take a couple of minutes, and when it's all set up, we recommend that you view the stage full screen with the text overlay as a footer, and you'll see the setting buttons to alter the position and size. So before we begin, a thank you to our sign interpreters and captioners for your support. So please be aware that the CHS Exchange plenary sessions, keynotes and panel discussions are being recorded and will be available to watch on the platform shortly after the sessions have ended. And they'll also be available via the CHS Alliance website post-event. Please take your time to familiarise yourself with the platform, the schedule, speakers, networking and expo area. They can all be accessed from the reception area, and the speakers can be found via the chat boxes. And a virtual assistant. So we have our virtual assistant, Tamsin. She's available to support you throughout the conference. So please message Tamsin via the event chat box at reception. And all plenary sessions will take place on the main stage. So this is where we are now, and all workshops are taking place on Zoom. So to find your chosen workshop on the Stages tab from the reception page, and then you'll join via Zoom link on the stage chat. So you can see the example we've got shown up now for workshop 1.1. So as always, please do tweet about the conference on Twitter and use the CHS handle at CHS_Alliance and the hashtags CHS Exchange 2021 and also raise the standard. And connect directly via the People tab from the main reception. So search by name and you can chat with them and you can schedule a meeting. and any replies will appear as a notification on the paper aeroplane, which is just at the top of that chat box in the top right-hand corner. And you can also follow all of our speakers on social media and reshare their content, and our speakers' handles are all available on their profiles. So you could also head to the network button in the navigation bar to begin to join the networking sessions. So all you need to do is, as you join, you'll be paired with another attendee for about 3 minutes before moving on to meet another attendee. But if you're having a great conversation, you can extend the 3 minutes by pressing connect. And the expo. So come and meet the CHS Alliance Secretariat team to learn more about their work. Visit their booths via the expo button, again from the reception area. And if you'd like to have a conversation with the team, just make sure you join at one of the scheduled times. So today that's at 12 o'clock CST, so each day. And then when the team will actually then be in person in the booths to chat with you. Okay, so we'll shortly start with today's opening plenary. And for all the plenaries on the main stage, please add your questions in the comments box. So please ensure to add the name of the panelists you'd like to address. And you'll also be able to participate in the Slido polls, which you'll see they'll appear next to the chat feature. And finally, the MYT team are here to help you with any technical difficulties. So email us at meetings@myt.uk.com or message Tamsin, our conference assistant, in the event chat. And we are now delighted to hand over to Stanley Nyoni, our MC and moderator, to welcome you to the conference.
Thank you, and welcome to the CHS Exchange. This year's exchange will explore the issue of people knowing and exercising their rights and how humanitarians can be held to account. We will explore this from 3 different but related perspectives. And my name is Stanley Nyoni. I will be the master of ceremony for the 3 days of the exchange. First, I would like to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and especially for the work that you do to make this world a better place. I am Zimbabwean and live in Sweden. My background is in sustainability and leadership development. And I want us to take a moment to pause and reflect on the work that we do and what brings us here today. What brings us to this work is our empathy, our compassion, our love and understanding that there is someone in our community or somewhere on the other side of the world who needs a helping hand. And as this exchange is designed to stimulate action, our first action is I would like to invite you to take a moment to think of a person who has made a difference in your life and bring them to your attention, and then send them gratitude in whatever form that works for you. And our next action will be to answer a question about where you are arriving from today. And here we are asking you to answer the question on the poll about which country are you logging in from? Not the country you would like to be from, but the country that you are sitting at today. So the instructions are on the screen. UK is coming up. Switzerland. Switzerland is big. Hungary, Netherlands, France. This will take a while. I think I should continue with giving you the structure of the program, and we come back to the poll when people are done. So over the next 3 days, we will be informed, inspired, and motivated to act as we explore the issue of accountability for people affected by crisis. In today's session, we are looking at leadership by people affected by crisis. And immediately after the opening remarks, we will be starting the next session with a panel designed to help us learn from other movements, that have made great strides in increasing participation to increase the rights and dignity of people and communities they represent. We will be reflecting on how the nothing about us without us approach has led to real change in the lives of people living with disabilities, HIV, or who experience marginalization due to their sexuality. We will ask, what does nothing about us without us mean for humanitarians? That's for day one. And for day two, we will be looking at how to shift the power. We know that local aid organizations play a crucial role in the crisis response. Yet less than 2% of all humanitarian funding goes directly to these groups. Money and influence are still unequally distributed to the humanitarian system. And we will hear from national NGO leaders and look at initiatives that are helping to shift the balance of power towards locally led humanitarian response. And on day three, we will call for a greater collective approach. This day is all about taking a forward-looking approach, building on what we have had over the previous days, and to focus on turning rhetoric into actions. How can we work collectively to improve collaboration and coordination and to improve accountability to people in crisis? Each day we will have a mix of plenary sessions, including keynotes, speakers, panelists, discussions, and themes. And each day will also feature workshop sessions addressing these important accountability challenges. These will be held in parallel with 3 workshops to choose from at any given time, and the instructions will be broadcast for you. These workshops will be led by members of CHS Alliance, and these are designed to showcase good practice and share innovations and insights from organizations and practitioners themselves. These exchanges are designed to connect us together, people and ideas, so there will be opportunities to meet with the Alliance team in expo booths and to network with each other at dedicated times. And let's go back to the word cloud and see what is there. We have Switzerland, of course, takes the prize for the number of participants, and the UK, followed by Germany, the Netherlands, France, Myanmar. Yeah. So, and as we see from the word cloud, we come from all over the world. Many of us don't speak English as a first language, and we are pleased to provide an English language caption option for those that need it. And also we are pleased to have international sign language interpreters with us. Please contact the event's virtual assistants if you need support. And I hope you have enough English to understand this instruction. So as we move on, I will now like to bring Robert, who is the interim chair of the CHS Alliance and director of Performance and Accountability International, and he's also the Director of Performance and Accountability at the Red Cross, British Red Cross. So Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Stanley, and it's a real privilege to be opening this 2021 virtual Global CHS Exchange. The first exchange was held in London in 2018, followed by Jordan and Bangkok in 2019. With the outbreak of the COVID pandemic last year, we moved to an online conference format, which meant that we could engage with far more people from more countries than before, as shown by that word cloud. CHS Exchanges have become a flagship event for the CHS Alliance, allowing our 150 plus members and our partners to come together to discuss the critical issues that face the humanitarian and development sectors, and to learn from each other as we strive to put quality and accountability at the heart of what we do. It's great to see the level of interest in this year's conference, with some 700 people registered to participate over the 3 days. It's going to be good. I've been with the British Red Cross for more than 9 years, and we were one of the founding members of the CHS Alliance when it was formed in 2015. I became a board member in 2016, and I'm now in my second 3-year term. I've been privileged to have held the role of interim chair of the CHS Alliance board for the last 12 months. And I can report that we have an excellent set of committed, knowledgeable and passionate board members, most of whom are involved in this CHS exchange in one way or another, and do keep an eye out for them. As the British Red Cross, we've taken the route of independent verification against the core humanitarian standard, with our initial audit in 2018, and we've just completed our midterm audit. For us, verification has really facilitated our ongoing structured learning and improvement. Building a strong, committed community around the CHS commitments is critical if we want to bring in the change of making aid work better. Change comes about by building a critical mass, and that is what the CHS Alliance is all about. Through engaging with our members, as well as the impressive efforts by 115 organisations who are verifying their performance against the CHS, we can build this momentum for change. CHS exchanges give us the platform to explore together the challenges that we face. And over the last 3 years, the exchanges have brought together some 1,000 people from more than 90 countries to consider how good practice and innovation can improve the quality and accountability of our work. These exchanges allow us to focus on solutions, innovations and ideas, sharing what works well, but equally important, sharing what doesn't work. We've learned from the data provided by CHS verifications where our strengths and weaknesses as a sector lie, and we've shared examples of tools, policies and practices that can address these directly. For example, and I can speak from recent experience here, we know that CHS Commitment 5, communities and people affected by crisis have access to safe and responsive complaints mechanisms, is consistently the lowest scoring of the 9 commitments. We've also heard about the challenges that organisations face. We've heard from practitioners about successful initiatives that can be replicated, and we've created new tools to help ensure feedback is listened to and acted upon. Yes, we've still a way to go, but we are making progress. So how can we maintain and even accelerate this process? 5 thoughts. First, we need to keep building on the momentum of the last 7 years since the launch of the standard, but also take advantage of the CHS revision process that will start next year. Let's build on what's worked well and revise where improvements can be made. Second, we need donors to really embrace the CHS, allowing CHS verification to be a substitutional part, up to 80% or more, of their own due diligence processes. This would significantly reduce the levels of due diligence duplication that seem to be endemic in the sector. Third, we need more organisations to verify against the CHS, and self-assessment is a great start. The verification process identifies the strengths and weaknesses of how an organisation works with and for communities and people affected by crisis. Fourth, if you're not, we would encourage you to join the CHS Alliance, then get involved with one or more of our 5 communities of practice, share learning with other members, and help influence the future. And finally, do use this CHS exchange to learn from and share with others so that together we can raise the bar on quality and accountability. I'd now like to hand over to Rahima Kujungu, a fellow member of the CHS Alliance Board and Deputy Country Director at TPO Uganda, one of our national members. Thank you.
Rahima, just a quick message to ask you to put your microphone on, please. We just missed your opening. Thank you so much. Let's just try that again. You could unmute yourself. Brilliant. I think that's working, Rahima. Do you want to just do a quick test?
Apologies for that. Thank you so much, Robert. And indeed, it is an honor for me to be part of this opening session. My name is Rahima Kujungu, as I had been introduced, and I work with a local NGO called TPO Uganda as a Deputy Country Director. I'm also a board member with CHS Alliance since 2019. TPO Uganda has been undergoing independent verification against CHS since 2018. So I'm well familiar with CHS Alliance work, both as a board member, but also as a local organization undergoing independent verification. As we come together once again, what are we aiming to achieve with this exchange? I can testify that CHS Alliance recognizes the importance of putting people affected by a crisis at the center of humanitarian action. We have long known that to serve people in crisis, Safely and effectively, we need more than just good intentions. We need to take action that will bring about lasting change. As an organization and a board member, that's why we have committed to the CHS, based on 9 commitments to communities and people affected by crisis, emphasizing the accountability of humanitarian responders. It is based on a premise that by knowing what to expect, people are in a position to hold us to account. Commitment 4 in particular sets out the people we serve should know their rights and entitlements. It promotes open communication, their participation, but also getting feedback. At TPO Uganda, we have experienced remarkable improvements in the way we relate with the people we serve. We are now more responsive to their needs than before we signed up with CHS. Our operational efficiency and procedures are in a better place now than before. As many of us know, and which must be addressed, is that power structures that govern humanitarian response still engage people affected by crisis as passive recipients, rather than a force in shaping their own priorities and plans. Achieving a commitment for people affected by crisis to hold us to account will unfortunately require uncomfortable but well overdue changes to the power structure that governs the humanitarian system. What does the situation require of us, you and me? What does this mean for you as a humanitarian and development actor working today in increasingly complex and protracted situations, armed conflict, climate disruptions, mass displacement, power imbalances, sexism and racism, and of course the current COVID-19 pandemic and all its challenges? It means that our role is more important now than ever. We must acknowledge and confront the power imbalance in the humanitarian and development sector that needs to be urgently addressed. If we are to really listen to the voices of people affected by crisis, then we must acknowledge the leadership role of national and local actors who are already at the forefront of aid delivery. Too often, national actors are relegated to the margins, and their capacities and values are not fully recognized within the international system. The CHS has an important role to play, as we all know. It is a universal standard to be followed by all organizations, international, national, and local, having a single common standard that organizations at all levels can commit to, and their performance against it verified, reduces imbalances and improves the effectiveness of the services they provide. You may ask yourself, what can you do in all this? And as a leader of a Ugandan NGO, I'm proud to have been part of the CHS Alliance's recent efforts to increase our engagement and ownership of the CHS by local and national organizations. We've been holding these national workshops on bringing the CHS closer to the people we serve, and it is beginning to bear fruit, but very far from where we want it. I'm also proud that the TPO Uganda has been verified against the CHS, as I mentioned earlier, and I would like to encourage as many national NGOs and local NGOs to sign up for different methods of verification. I want also to encourage all our partners and all of you here today to undertake a CHS verification, to really demonstrate your accountability to those we serve. I also want to challenge the donors not only to continue providing quality funding to all partners in an equitable manner, but also uphold your commitment to the localization agenda by strengthening quality partnership, flexible funding, but also harmonizing the due diligence procedures that are quite tedious. Recognizing the contribution, the capacities, and synergies of local and national NGOs in delivering humanitarian is a noble thing to do at this moment. A lot more national and local NGOs are already at the forefront of taking on leadership challenge, and we are ready for more. We need more than good intentions. To bring lasting and meaningful services to the affected people, we must move from rhetoric to action. We need to take action. We need to stop talking. We need the CHS. Thank you for listening to me.
So thank you, Rehema. We will take some questions now. Robert, can you come back there? Yes. We are inviting the participants, the audience, to reflect on some questions, remarks that come out of what we just heard from Robert and Rehema. Please. While we wait for questions and reflections, I have one question. What is the mindset that will shift the current situation from really handing over power to the local, the people that we serve? This is a question to both of you.
Rahima, why don't you take that first, as you're the national entity?
Sorry, come again.
What is the mindset that would shift the power to hand it over to the local, first the local NGOs, but also to the people that we serve?
I think it needs a mindset change, as you mentioned, as you rightly mentioned. I think the people who hold power need to realize that the local or national people have the capacity to do as much and as excellent work as international agencies. There could be a few edges to trim here and there, but I think we have the capacity, we have the potential if the stage is actually made available for us. I think it needs a mind shift to know that, yes, the local and national NGOs can actually take charge of their affairs. They have the capacity, they have the potential. I think the most important thing is the potential, that once facilitated, once capacitated, they are as good as any other person to take charge of their issues. And most importantly is that the local and national individuals, they are closer to the people we serve. So we know the culture, we know the political climate, we know the different cultures in different settings, and we are closer to the people that we serve.
Thank you.
And I think from me, I'd just say trust and long-term partnerships. I think they're very much linked, but if you have that trust with your partner and you've established that over a period of time, then you have the confidence that, as Rahima says, they'll be able to deliver. They are much closer to those end communities and much better to understand the real needs of those who are far, far away. So that's for me the two thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Another question for Rahima. What has it given you to have the CHS standard verification?
First of all, it has, as I mentioned in my presentation, it has made us closer to the people that we serve. In terms of when you look at the commitments, there are certain things that we used not to do, especially involving the beneficiaries in holding us accountable. Would go into the community, would just conduct our activities as most organizations do. And we're not minding so much about being held accountable, but now we do that. But also in terms of operational systems, the financial accounting, the human resource, we are much, much far better because we've undergone a due diligence. And as a result of this, we've been able to actually sign up a very big grant, over $20 million with USAID. As a result, I can contribute that to undergoing this verification, because it's a very detailed verification exercise that once you go through it, most of the donors, you'll go through most of the due diligences with a lot of ease, because you have all the paperwork in place, you have the systems in place, and you have the documentation to back it up. So it really sets your standards, your operations, your system, your HR, on a very good path. And for us, that has been a very big plus for us. Okay. And I would want as much as possible to encourage local organizations to sign up. And for now, I think we have a lot more flexible processes. I think the self-assessment probably is a lot easier than what we're undergoing for the 4-year independent verification. So there shouldn't be an excuse for not signing up.
Thank you, Rehema. Thank you. Thank you, Rehema. Thank you, Robert, for sharing these insights with us. Thank you both. So we will now transition into the next discussions, and our speakers should be arriving soon. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Stanley. So yes, we have Frederick who's joined us, so we can hear from Frederick first of all, if you'd like to do a quick introduction, and then we'll be moving on to our next panelist as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. First, I would like to thank Robert and Rehema for sharing such valuable summaries of why we are here today and why we are what we are trying to achieve together. As we have heard, the CHS Exchange is about connection and exchange of ideas, and I'm really excited by the panel discussions that is up next, which brings in people from other social movements to explore how increasing participation of people from marginalized communities has brought about real change. Many of us will be familiar with "Nothing about us without us." It is a slogan that was adopted by disability rights movements in South Africa in the 1990s. It expresses the idea that no policy should be decided by any representative without the full and direct participation of the members of the groups affected by that policy. What does "nothing about us without us" mean? What has it achieved? What can humanitarians learn from other movements? I'm delighted to facilitate this panel that brings together advocates from the human rights, disability, HIV, LGBTIQ, and communities to share their perspectives on this important topic. And just as a reminder, before we start, please note that there will be time for taking some questions from the audience at the end of this discussion. And please type your questions in the stage chat and not the event chat. And we will take some of them at the end. If you have a question for a specific person, please indicate this in the comment. So Frederick, we are going to hear from Frederick Oko, who is a disability inclusion specialist and social entrepreneur who has founded 2 organizations for disability rights and social enterprise in Kenya. And Frederick will talk about how has the disability movement embraced "nothing about us without us." How has this led to policy change? Over to you, Frederick.
Thank you so much, and hello to the viewers for today. My name is Frederick, as introduced, and I'm Program Officer at Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa, currently working on issues of disability. As to the request on what I'm speaking on today is looking at what has disability movement achieved so far, or where is the space for our identity, nothing about us without us, and how do we, how can others learn from us, and what have we been through to reach where we are now? And really to understand this concept, we must first go to what is it, what do we refer to as a movement? And I wanted to clear that a movement can be any group of people that is working together for a common social or political or cultural goal. And that's what persons with disability have agitated towards, wanting to work together, wanting to see that their issues are being taken care of or being considered in the communities that they live in. So a movement then becomes a social movement when it kind of requires a collective power beyond that possible from a small group. So persons with disability coming together to really champion their issues, and they've done so from the 1950s into the 80s, into the 90s, and into the current century, as it were. So the movement of persons with disability has been started through various triggers, and one of them is people did engineer the movement. People who saw particular issues affecting them and not being talked about. So those were parents of children with disability, for example. And then we have a movement that has been started through spontaneous kind of correlation. So people seeing that I'm affected by this issue, I'm affected by this issue, why can't we come together and see how we work towards elevating our issues that the society understands what are we going through as individuals with disability. So it becomes a way that we see catalytic kind of leaders emerging and leading and building up a momentum towards effectively representing issues of persons with disability within the society. And to this, we have people who adopt early, and then we have people who kind of help to generate shared agendas, as it were. And these agendas have been more about how do we build power around our issues. There have been issues around discrimination. How do we sustain a movement that campaigns against discrimination of individuals who have a disability? How do we build a mass around awareness that persons with disability are equally required to attain education or access education as other children who are born within our countries? And really, to speak about disability movement, you must first understand that this wasn't just something that came overnight. It's because first, disability in our societies, especially in an African context, disability is a very personal matter. Persons with disability are hidden, especially children, and people do not want to associate with children with a family that has given birth to someone with disability. So normally, people will hide their kids for fear of kind of retribution that maybe there's something wrong that they did. Then we begin to see parents beginning to advocate for their children, that they want these children to have an equal opportunity at life, just as other children who do not have a disability. We see then parents of children with disability begin to form groups of parents of children with disability around their neighborhoods, because they want to see these children accessing education on an equal basis just as other children. I'll take you back to also the civil rights movement, say in America, where you see now also parents of children with disability, persons with disability themselves, disability advocates beginning to join civil movement so that they begin to learn from what is it has been happening in the civil rights movement for them to take a place so that their issues begin to be highlighted within the civil rights movement. We've seen also persons with disability join women's rights movement globally to begin and see how do they enjoy their agendas in terms of disability advocates being heard within the women's rights movement globally, and begin to infiltrate so that their issues become part and parcel of a larger movement within the society. There then emerges a disability rights movement from lessons learned from all these parent support groups, women's rights movement, civil rights movement, and then we see a birthing of different association of persons with disability representing different types of disability who have a common issue to champion. They're looking for their interest in terms of how do we ensure that this society doesn't place us down. This society considers us as first-class citizens, not second-class citizens. This society considers us people who have a right to exist within the boundaries of our borders. And really then we see persons with disability agitating for participation, because first they've been denied participation. We see them agitate towards inclusion, because majority of them have been excluded from education, from even family life. Others have had to be killed. So they are agitating towards the right for life, because some communities have been killing persons with disability who have severe disability, because it is a shame that they will bring to the family. So people begin to see that we need to talk for ourselves. Otherwise, nobody else cares if we don't speak that we have a right to life, we have a right to basic rights, accessing education, accessing employment, accessing any other right that any contemporary citizen should be getting within the borders of their countries, and are, in fact, within the global community of citizens. And we've seen then, because for a movement to continue being in place, we have to have something that we constantly keeping us alive. And for disability rights movement, it's been things like ableism. People deciding who is best or who looks well or who can do this better or how do we relate to someone. So challenging ableism in society is something that has also kept the disability movement alive and awake, that people are constantly challenging that I have a right to be taken the way I am, and there's no way you can refer me to or try to shadow me with somebody else. Discrimination against persons with disability, be it either access to services, the lived environment, or institutional barriers that we have to go through, environmental barriers, attitudinal, which is key and sometimes takes a long time to dismantle. So these are really things that then fire the disability movement and ensures that then people have to constantly come together, people have to constantly remind their peers that, yeah, we are here and we are here to stay, we're not going anywhere, even though we look different, we seem to be looking different from yourselves, but we are born with the same rights under the human rights frameworks. And this has then led to some sort of successes, because it wouldn't have been for if persons with disability never came together as a people, as a movement, to fight for their rights, and really doing this alongside their allies. Their allies are their parents, people they love, their friends, their partners, wives, brothers, sisters. We wouldn't now be talking about negotiated UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which then actually embodies the nothing about us without us movement kind of framework, because this is now the global framework under which the rights of persons with disability are laid to bear. And every person now is trying to use that when they are referring to issues around persons with disability. And this is one of the framework that was negotiated under 2 years and came into being through the leadership of persons with disability themselves. Well, if not them, it would have taken longer if it wasn't for persons with disability themselves saying, this is an urgent thing, this is what we want, being clear and really going forward to ensure that the UN puts up this particular framework. On the African continent, we have Africa Disability Protocol that was once first rejected because of a huge number of participation of non-disabled people. But then up to 2018, when now persons with disability took up that mantle and said, this is our life, this is our right, it came into being that now people were able to listen and say, oh, okay, so it is about you. Something else that then has resulted from a movement of persons with disabilities, Sustainable Development Goals, for example. Previously, all the development framework didn't include issues of disability. But when persons with disability came to the table, they said, no way, we cannot eradicate poverty or reduce poverty if there isn't the participation of persons with disability. And they really looked at how do we then fight for our or represent our issues so that they are captured, and they are actually captured for posterity of society, not only for ourselves, but it does an effect to the whole society so that we live beneficial lives and supportive lives within the community. And really lastly, I would like to say that the right to independent living in communities, because sometimes you'll hear that kids are being hidden in their homes, but then persons with disability came and said, no, a person with disability, so long as they've attained this particular age, they are able to live on their own and do their own issues, so long as they have a supportive environment. So really, it's about nothing else without us that then has brought in all these particular successes and that we can see today. So I think other movements can see and really work around their issues if they come together, define the agenda, and work towards what is it that needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. Very inspiring. I see the passion, and I'm actually shocked by the fact that we hide people with disabilities, and that needs to change, obviously. And I will now bring in. Can you stay behind for the panel discussion? We will bring in John. John, your question is how have people, so first, John is an introduction. John is an associate research professor at Emory University who has worked in the US domestic settings in HIV starting in 1992 and in global HIV efforts since 2006 at the intersection of religion and HIV. And John, your question will be how have people living with or affected by HIV led their own activism? How has nothing about us without us driven real change?
Thank you, Stanley, and thank you to CHS for inviting me to be part of the session today. I want to answer your question, Stanley, by giving a bit of history about my own work, first in the United States, and that work began as a chaplain. When I was in seminary, I came out as a gay man and first began volunteering in HIV service organizations in the United States as a buddy to people living with HIV in 1990. And when I graduated from seminary, my first job was as a chaplain to people living with, and at that time, preparing to die from HIV and AIDS. I worked as a chaplain here in the US in Chicago in a hospital setting with in a clinic with about 1,500 patients, all HIV diagnosed, most of them gay men, in a hospital that also had a 35-bed inpatient unit. And I also worked as a chaplain in a pediatric hospital in a pediatric HIV program with about 150 children living with HIV and with their mothers who were infected with the virus and affected family members. And what I found over and over again as I worked in both of those settings is that as a chaplain, is that the people that I was talking with and standing alongside of were addressing spiritual questions about their own life and about their imminent death in many cases without an easy or unambiguous access to a religious tradition that was comforting for them or that helped them to have answers to what they were facing. In fact, in many instances, religious traditions that had been part of their lives had rejected them or turned them away. And a lot of my work in that point in time was to work with people to reimagine or to confirm that God was present in their lives, was at work in their lives, even if their community had said that God had forsaken them. For me, this experience parallels the thing that I see to be that's really astounding about the AIDS treatment and advocacy movement as it seeks to continue to live out and to grow more fully into the phrase and the commitment, nothing about us without us. And that's a refusal to accept any kind of dehumanizing lie that comes from officials or organizations or institutions that says that their lives and all of the complexity of what it means to be a human being don't matter. To refuse that lie and to articulate both in one's own life and in social context that in fact all lives do matter and that they matter in the particularity of social context. That happened with gay men advocating for anyone to care and do something about HIV and AIDS, and to push both our federal government and communities around the United States to do something in the 1980s. That expanded in the late 1980s and early 1990s as women advocated for their own needs and validated their own experiences as they lived with and died from a disease without ever receiving a diagnosis that would provide them access to support services, because the official case definition in the United States did not include opportunistic infections that were specific to women until 1993. At that era, it included Black and Brown people responding to the epidemic as it grew in their own communities, as they recognized that racism was keeping a coordinated response, limiting a coordinated response and a holistic response in their own communities. As combination therapy became available and utterly changed the treatment modality and the clinical trajectory of the epidemic in the mid-1990s, people who use drugs and alcohol in chaotic ways began to organize to demand enhanced and expanded treatment services and to implement harm reduction models that would help them to live if they weren't interested, at least at a certain point in time, in getting off drugs and getting clean. People with mental health needs began to demand that treatment services, mental health treatment services, be part of coordinated and holistic HIV primary care, and that adherence to complex antiretroviral regimens would not be possible for people with severe and persistent mental illness without some form of support services that included psychiatric and psychological treatment services. People with pressing socioeconomic challenges, unemployment, underemployment, wage stagnation, precarious housing or homelessness, pressing for and making the case that comprehensive wraparound services for psychosocial support had to be included in clinical settings and in coordination between community organizations and clinical programs in order to address the realities of life with socioeconomic challenges in place. People in small towns and rural communities outside of large urban cities advocating for the expansion of services beyond large urban centers and ways for enhanced and expanded interdisciplinary services to be implemented in their own communities. People who live in the global South building coalitions and networks with HIV advocacy communities in Europe and North America to build on successes related to advocacy and a demand for services, and also to create new models and programs that worked better, and to educate and to enhance and enrich the experiences of those in the United States and North America around what works better in local community context and settings. This scenario that I've laid out, this kind of survey of the lessons we've learned, sometimes hard-learned lessons in the HIV pandemic, hasn't been linear. A lot of these kinds of challenges were happening simultaneously, and it's not been simple. It's been messy, it's been contentious, it's been difficult, and it's required us to examine our own biases, our own limitations, our own kind of unexamined practices that lead to exclusion. I said that I started this work as a chaplain. Today, a good bit of my work in academic settings and in global HIV practice settings is focused on building coalitions between faith communities, faith-based organizations, religious leaders, people living with HIV and AIDS, and global funders. I do a lot of work on a faith initiative co-sponsored by PEPFAR and UNAIDS. My own faith commitment is guided by the core principle of the liberation theology movement within the Christian tradition. Historically, that principle has been articulated as this, that God has a preferential option for the poor. But that phrase isn't completely accurate in reflecting the insight and the revelation of that faith movement coming out of the Christian tradition. The claim was never about the poor alone, although it certainly included and was articulated by people who identified and were indeed struggling around economic needs. But in base communities across Latin America in which liberation theology first grew, the articulation was more nuanced and more multifaceted. And it was more the idea that God has a preferential option for the despised. God is found where those who have been sent to the margins, the edges, those who have been rejected and dismissed by institutions and organizations and communities. God has an option for them, and God is found where they are found. This is a theological option for me, foundation for me in my own life, but it's also an anthropological foundation. And by that, I mean that I believe that it tells us something not only about God and the nature of God, but about the nature of human beings at our best. That we discover our own humanity, when we see the humanity in others who have been dismissed as less than fully human, and when we affirm their humanity without demanding that they and their lives fit into some kind of approved, acceptable box or identity. And so the Nothing About Us Without Us movement within HIV treatment and advocacy programs globally has changed so much about how we respond to this virus in 2021. It's created and sustained holistic models and interdisciplinary models that don't address clinical needs alone, but also include psychosocial needs and services. It's impacting funding structures and funding priorities by multi-partner and multilateral organizations, by bilateral partnerships between individual nations and between individual nations, and how those funding mechanisms are implemented and carried out. It's given birth to and created and sustained an entire kind of structure for advocacy and policy. It's influenced how HIV and clinical research has been carried out, and it's influenced the research in HIV itself. And it's created a new paradigm for how people living with HIV, people seeking clinical care, interact and relate to a medical provider. And that expands beyond clinical relationships between provider and patient to accessing services in psychosocial settings as well. It's expansive and it's intersectional and it's organized through clear advocacy demands that are based in data and science, and it's engaged in political processes and direct action so that it's not just about kind of lip service and nice terms and phrases, but it's also recognizing that there are questions about how power is utilized and what justice in relation to that power has to look like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederick. Thank you, John. The word that stays with me is to mobilize people to refuse the dehumanizing lie that their lives don't matter. And I find that powerful. So I would like to remind the participants that you can put your questions and reflections on the chat. Thank you. And now we are going to listen to Clara. Clara is from Civicus, who has worked with grassroots organizations involved in development and human rights on shifting the power. And your question, Clara, is why is participation of marginalized people so important to the human rights movement? And what do you think the humanitarian sector can learn from the rights-based approach? Over to you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Stanley, and thank you very much to the CHS Alliance for the invitation. So yeah, my name is Clara, and I've been working with Civicus for the last 7 years, and currently working as senior advisor on civil society resourcing. For those who don't know Civicus, I think it's important to start from there. It's a global alliance dedicated to strengthen civil society and citizen action around the world. We're member-based. We have more than 12,000 members in over 175 countries, and we work with members to protect and promote civic freedoms and democratic rights. And by civic freedoms, we really mean the freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of association. So basically those freedoms that allow citizens to organize, speak out, and take action. The civil society resourcing work stream that I am involved in aims at leveraging Civicus visibility and networks to push for more and better resources for the sector overall, but particularly for smaller and less formal groups from traditionally marginalized or oppressed communities in the global south. And it is especially in this domain that I have witnessed firsthand some of the things that I think John had mentioned about groups that have been established much more thoughtfully to really move resources to activists, groups and movements, and that have set up governance mechanisms and ways of working that are really participatory, devolved, and constituency-led. So really embodying the nothing about us without us principle. But just to say, in terms of some of the reasons why participation is so important for the human rights movement, I'd like to say that I think first and foremost, it's part of its DNA. The foundations of the global human rights movement really involve resistance to various oppressions, be it colonialism, imperialism, slavery, racism, ableism, as Frederick mentioned, patriarchy, oppression of indigenous rights, you name it. So it's quite obvious why it is underpinned by the direct participation of the people marginalized from political, social, and economic opportunities. And I'd say some of the most recurring arguments that are giving, in support of why participation is so important, that I've seen across the board are actually quite obvious. But let me mention them. The first thing is because it's the most sensible thing to do. These communities have the lived experience on the problems that affect them directly. And so they know best what are the solutions that work best for them and in their own contexts. And, if we talk about these, we're really looking at making sure that the problems that are identified are the most relevant, that the solutions are the most appropriate, and that there is the buy-in of those communities. So the most sensible thing to do, but also the right thing to do. It's their right to make those decisions. It's their right to chart their destiny. And we're talking about the right of self-determination here. We're talking, as we're talking about today, of the nothing about us without us principle. We're talking about, for example, the principle of free, prior, and informed consent that has been brought forward by the indigenous rights movement. Just to name a few. So the most sensible thing to do, the right thing to do indeed, but then it's really something that increases the legitimacy of any decision or any plan or any project and the full ownership, which at the end of the day ensures the durability or the sustainability of any initiative, decision, or plan. And then most importantly, it's about equalizing power. It's about building the agencies of these groups that are most affected, to recognize their resourcefulness and to transform relationships and equalizing power, as I said. And if I had to pick maybe one learning from the right-based approach that could be relevant or useful for the humanitarian community, I think the conceptual framework that identifies right holders and their entitlements and the corresponding duty bearers and their obligations, and that is really working towards empowering agency and capabilities of right holders to demand changes or to be part of the decisions and the solutions, and of course of duty bearers to meet these obligations. And this conceptual framework is really underpinned by an attempt to analyze inequalities, power imbalances, and to really overcome those blockages to the fulfillment of human rights and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. You have been very succinct in the what we can take from the movement into the humanitarian sector, which is the conceptual framework. And I would like you to share more about that when we come to the discussions. Yeah. And now we are going to have Emily. Emily is an advocate for needs and rights of people of diverse sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics, or what is popularly known as the LGBTIQ plus people in international humanitarian and development programs. So Emily, your question is, how has the LGBTIQ plus community increased people-led activism over the years? Are there any lessons for the humanitarian sector? Over to you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Stanley, and thanks to CHS and everyone who's joined this session. I just like to start by sort of painting a picture or creating a bit of an emotion here. There's an international conference every 4 years where LGBTIQ civil society gets together globally, and it's a conference like I've never experienced any other conference before. It's sort of like walking into an alternate universe, and there are people from all kinds of different countries and different backgrounds. People for whom LGBTIQ activism means lots of different things. But it's a place where our gender, our sexuality, our sex characteristics is not a problem. All of a sudden, it's a place where it's a good thing, and we inhabit and we own that space. And there will be a party at the end for sure. And you can also be sure that Sister Sledge will be there. It's in the soundtrack. We are family. I got all my sisters with me. I think that concept of family is one that I want to sort of just stick with just for a moment. I think, like any family, what's known as sort of the LGBTIQ plus community has many tensions. So, for example, who is within that community, and as the acronym has grown, LGBTIQ, etc., there have been tensions there. John's already talked a bit about HIV today. I think there was a time in the 80s and 90s when HIV funding started to flow into LGBTIQ communities, and there were tensions there as well between organisations which have been very much sort of community based, doing community organising, and organisations that all of a sudden had to write grant proposals. And have Gantt charts and do financial plans and so forth. And in a sense, are we losing something in this sort of increasingly technical and professional way of organising? And there are other tensions, for example, around recognition politics and that idea of refusal, which has already come up a couple of times in this discussion. And recognition politics is that sense of are we doing this just because we want to be included with society the way it is, or do we actually want to change society? And so a really good example of that is pride marches, and the debates about whether police should be marching in uniform in pride marches in the context of Black Lives Matter, or whether the number of corporate floats in pride marches is a problem these days. Are we just trying to be part of society as it is, or are we actually really trying to change things? And so there are all of these tensions, but something somehow has kept that LGBTIQ community together, and the umbrella has expanded. And so I was sort of coming into this, I was just thinking about what is that thing that holds it all together. And I think the most important thing for me about LGBTIQ community or people-led activism is that it's a form of community care. And there's a really good article by Carol McGranahan called Activism as Care, which focuses on how the Tibetan nation in exile holds itself together. And it was kind of really interesting for me to read that article because it resonated a lot, because LGBTIQ people are often exiles within their own societies. We may be ostracised by families, by faith communities, in schools, workplaces. We may find ourselves experiencing harassment, discrimination, violence, walking down the street, accessing services, and so forth. So there's almost like it's a shared sense of exclusion that we start with, that bands us together, and then becomes something, a motivation to celebrate who we really are, and to work together. And I think this is where the power of LGBTIQ community organising starts. There's a real sense of activism as care. And when I say care, I don't mean sort of the tradition of self-care that we see at the moment, which is often a little neoliberal. And I don't mean it sort of as like a vague idea of charity, but a much deeper form of connectedness between people that's almost ecological. It's almost like a mycelial network connecting everyone together. Because if you're going to challenge what's probable and hold out for what's possible, then there's a lot of care, there's a lot of connectedness, bringing people together that has to happen. What does this mean possibly for humanitarians? Well, if I think to a project that we were involved with, we're both an LGBTIQ organisation and a humanitarian development organisation, so we're often caught in the middle to some extent, or to put that in another way, we're often brokering partnerships. And I remember we were brokering one partnership between an INGO and a national LGBTIQ organisation, and the LGBTIQ organisation said in a meeting, if we introduce you to the LGBTIQ people in this place where you want to do this project, we're making this commitment for life. What are you doing? And of course, which is of course a very uncomfortable situation for the INGO to be in, because they couldn't make a commitment like that. But it was kind of really important that the LGBTIQ organisation made that clear, because there's a much deeper ethics which is driving what they're doing. And when we came to do activities within that project, which actually did go ahead, one of the people from that organisation, Anna, who's now a staff member with EduFect, reminded me on a number of occasions that we had to move at the pace of the community. I was sort of, again, stuck in the middle a little bit, understanding that we had to work with the community, but also having to write reports and knowing what the budget was and so forth. And there were many times where Anna was like, sort of, it's not, you can live in a fantasy world of these plans and schedules if you want to, but it's not going to happen like that. So either you want to make it work, or you want to go through the motions, and what's it going to be. And so just immensely grateful for that kind of reality check, because I think often we have a very technical mindset in the humanitarian sector. Inclusion becomes performative. Accountability to affected people becomes a manual, rather than it actually being, well, how as people are we working together to get to somewhere else. So for me, nothing about us without us. I think sometimes we can say that without realizing how radical it actually is. It's not just calling for people to be included within a cluster committee in a response. It's asking for something much deeper than that, and it's tapping into a kind of connectedness and a sense of care that LGBTIQ people in emergencies show for each other, and that's something that I think there's quite a lot that we can learn from, as well as quite a lot that we need to respect. Back to you.
Thank you, Emil. So we're going to bring the other speakers in for a panel discussion. But the thing that stood up for me in your presentation is that the statement itself is much more than much more than just the words and saying it. It's really like a way of being. It's a way of saying, how do we build a community of care so that the people themselves actually step up and they are defining what it is that it means for their lives to actually take leadership and take agency for their lives, right? Chiara is coming back. Yeah. So thank you all for this fascinating share. And there is a couple of threads that I would like you to get back to, which is, one is, what are we learning from each other? And if there's something you picked up from this current discussion, and also what mindset behaviors do we need to create? Do we need to create a conducive environment to recognize the agency and leadership of the people we serve? So who would like to start? And I would please keep it short. And I mean short as in let's have a discussion. Yeah. Thank you.
Stanley, can you repeat your question?
So I have two questions. What are we learning from the sharing that we just had from each other? But also, what is the mindset and behaviors that we need to create for us to create a conducive environment to recognize the agency and behavior and leadership of people we serve from these different communities, and also from the humanitarian sector?
I think for me, one of the things I'm taking away from the presentations of the other panelists for this session is a reminder in the HIV AIDS context, both in the United States and globally, that a commitment to nothing about us without us isn't something we've achieved, but always something we're having to remind ourselves again and again and again is a commitment that we operate in structures and systems that by their nature, by having boundaries, there are people who reside outside of those boundaries, and our challenge in front of us is always to keep looking for how those boundaries have been drawn and to expand them. But we haven't arrived there yet, and there's a lot of work to be done around some of the context and communities that have been brought up today for the global HIV movement.
Thank you. Frederick?
Yeah, we can learn from one another that perhaps nothing about us without it is indeed a journey. So we've just started, we are not yet there. And that the best leadership in terms of if we are going to serve a particular need, we should be able to be guided by people affected by that particular need. And I think humanitarian services need to be guided by this a lot, because sometimes we do assume that that we know we have a PhD in a particular field or something like that, so we know the best. Yet the rule book is not that actually. You need somebody to guide you that this is the best way for you to respond in a particular way that will be both meaningful but also respectful to my rights as a human being. Even if I'm facing this particular challenge, I don't stop being a human being. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, I mean, picking up on that idea of a journey and a process. I mean, sort of one of the things that stands out for me for activism is that you're fighting against what's probable. You know, it's about setting aside what's probable, and imagining what's possible. And I think within the humanitarian sector, what we've seen since the Grand Bargain is that what's probable is that we'll keep doing the same thing that we're doing. We might use some different words to describe it, and we might sort of make some changes around the edges. But the power relations, the way that the money drives what's happening in the sector means that it's probable that a lot of the same things will keep on happening. If we want to make the shift, then we really have to be. There's a lot of nurturing that needs to go on of the possible. And if I think about LGBTIQ people and the way that civil society organisations have worked effectively within the human rights space, that's taken a lot of nurturing, a lot of movement building. It's not something that happened overnight, that people just sort of plugged in, it all was just plugged in. And so there's a lot of that nurturing that I think needs to happen within the humanitarian sector that I haven't seen a lot of so far.
Thank you. Chiara?
Yeah, well, echoing everything that's been said, but perhaps from my side, something that got me thinking is really the importance of exchanging with each other and to look at the how can we embody this principle. And I think there are no shortage of examples of emergent organizations, formations, movements that are already showing us how this can be done. And there's so much we can learn from each other and how things can be done and how things are being done. But for that to happen, I think we all need to be intentional in making spaces and resourcing spaces so that everyone can be part of this exchange in a meaningful way. So yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. And the question is from Karen McDonald. Big question, how do we get NGOs to move away from an inclusion tick box and actually challenge the cultures within our own offices and organizations? That's a big question, yeah? Who wants to take it?
Wow, if I knew the answer to that question, it's a massive frustration. Just the way that LGBTIQ, and I imagine for other people here, other people with other characteristics get tacked onto the end of long lists of marginalised groups, who are then supposedly, consulted what does consultation mean with a group of people you haven't consulted with before? When you hear what they say, well, what are you going to do with it? These are all things that require transformative processes within organisations. One thing that I have seen that's worked is an organisation which has actually hired an LGBTIQ person to be part of the office, and so it's rescue in Pakistan. That's who have a Quadjusiro or non-binary person who they brought to work on a particular project, which not only provided an opportunity to connect with a community that was highly unlikely to connect with NGOs for a whole variety of reasons, but also meant that they realised they had to undergo a process of transformation within their organisation. And so I think having a more diverse workplace is possibly one place to start.
Mm. Anyone else?
Sorry,
go. No, Frederick, please go.
I wouldn't say there's an inclusion tick box or something, because we need to disconstruct that notion that actually there's a box that you can tick and say, yeah, so things are fine. The important is, like, do we have empathy within our organization? If we start from there as an individual, is this what I want to achieve? Do I want to achieve a society that is fully inclusive of whoever, as diverse as we can be, that lives in that particular society? That's the starting point. Then how do we construct that society? That society needs that we are honest with ourselves, with what is it that we are entrusted with, if resources towards deploying to the field, or if it is looking at how can we be diverse in a staffing. Then start constructing that society from our own individual kind of mindset that this is possible. I am part of contribution to that, but there isn't a box for me to tick. I am contributing my part. Somebody else, my colleague, will need to contribute X amount, and then we are moving towards that particular society. But if we say one person can just be ticking boxes, we won't achieve what really we want. But at least we must dismantle the fact that there's even an inclusion box that to tick.
Chiara, you mentioned a conceptual framework. Would you like to say something more about this, and of course answer the question if you want to do that?
Yeah, so I think that maybe building on what Frederick and Emily said, it's really embracing a different mindset, a solidarity mindset, and with that, I'd say that another thing that one could do is really try to use different metrics of what impact and success are, and how measurement is done, and who gets to define what impact and success is. And I think that can help also transform about the culture and I think reposition organizations in the role that they can have if they want to have a meaningful role in an ecosystem of support and enabling environment for groups and communities to thrive. And looking at, sorry, what was the other question, Stanley? I forgot.
The framework.
Oh, the framework. So I had mentioned that the human rights, the rights-based approach really adopts a framework of right holders and duty bearers, and I think that can be useful in the sense that it really helps you understand that there are injustices, discriminations, but people have entitlements to rights, and that there is the duty of others to make sure that those rights are enjoyed. And I think that also can help you, again, shift a little bit your mindset in terms of how can you enable these people to enjoy these rights. And I've mentioned some before, including starting from the right to self-determination, and really make sure that people are at the driving seat of their development and their destinies. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yes. So the thing that you have mentioned, actually all of you, is this intentionality to be inclusive. And my question is, how easy is that? for most of us, it is a blind spot that we are not inclusive. And for some people, maybe it is a choice. I don't know if it is a choice. But the question is, how do I move from having this blind spot of excluding people because they don't look like me or they don't feel the way I want them to feel, to a place where I can actually now choose a different way of being, you know, to choose a different future where I can start to even explore. Any thoughts and ideas on that?
So the way I do respond to this question in terms of if I'm working with peers or policymakers when doing like stuff around disability inclusion training, for example, I will ask someone, how would you like to be treated? For example, if you got an accident at the age of 40 and you lost the use of your perhaps 2 limbs, for example, how would you like this society to treat you? And you knew you were in charge of a budget that constructed a building that is inaccessible for a wheelchair user, for example. You are in charge of a budget that denied someone an opportunity to go to education, get an education. And now you are the person who's on the other side. But now you had an opportunity to make that right. How would you then want to be treated? So, and when you get at a personal level discussing with someone, for example, for me, I have a physical disability, and then I'll tell someone, I didn't apply to be someone with a disability. You too cannot apply. Perhaps it can happen. You can have a sickness, you have a wrong injection, you lose the use of your limb or your spine or something like that. So why is it that can treat a society that is fairer for everyone in whichever circumstance that we find ourselves in as we go through the journey of life? Why isn't it better then that we don't have them to spend more? Because initially in the construction stages, we thought about that there will be someone who need to use a ramp here, there's someone who need to an accessible toilet somewhere, there's someone who need an accessible transport. And all of us, even in our old age, will need those particular services. When you look at it that way, it means you have a responsibility as an individual, because one of those things might catch up with you in future, in life, before you exit this world. So you need to be mindful of that, because I'm not asking something out of this world. I'm asking for something that makes me live on the same level as you, as a common human being. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Emily, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and again, pulling up from what Frederick said, it's sometimes I can't believe that we need to have so many conversations to justify inclusion. As a sector, as humanitarian and development organisations, why on earth would we be doing things which are not inclusive? I mean, how does that get justified? What's the thought process? What's the thought process behind that? So I think part of it is we have to stop thinking about inclusion as, you know, a nice to have, a little bit of charity that will involve a few people if we get a chance. It's not just for protection people. It's not just for the human rights people. It's for everyone in an emergency. And I guess one of the things, when I'm not ranting, that we try to do is use a lot of stories to connect up the experiences. Because when we connect as people, then it's a whole lot harder to put people in boxes and to look away. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we really try to overcome is this sense that it's too hard, it's too difficult, and often, you know, there are really good reasons, do no harm and risk assessments and so forth that need to be done, but sometimes the fact that we haven't connected with organisations within communities with people means that, you know, we don't have that sense of connection. We don't have the understanding that then would allow us to understand, well, what is actually possible. And so I think those stories and connections are really important.
Thank you. I'm sorry, John, we have to wrap up. If you can say it in 20 seconds.
Quickly, that I appreciate what Frederick and Emily both just said. The thing that it reminds me of is that those interpersonal connections are important, but we also have to recognize we're working at the level of structural, institutional, and political context in which we have to push people into difficult places related to accountability, and that our own organizations and institutions that reflect this kind of inclusion will be countercultural And it may mean that in doing that, we will have challenges related to funding or relationships. And we need to be clear about what our commitments are and to be smart and strategic as we enter into that political space around some of these contentious issues.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. Amazing reflections, and we are taking lots of things for the humanitarian sector to reflect on. And to be continued. I hope you stay a little longer for the networking that's coming up next. We are now going to encourage you to meet fellow participants in randomized 3-minute sessions. This will be followed by the expo booths, an opportunity to talk directly to CHS Alliance members and to learn more about the different elements of the work of the Alliance. And then we will have a scheduled break to avoid screen fatigue. After the break at 1 p.m. European time or Swiss time, we have the first set of our parallel workshops sessions. And here you have to make a choice. These workshop sessions will be led by some CHS Alliance members, often in partnership with other organizations. The workshops tackle the question of people knowing their rights and how, as humanitarians, we are held to account. The 3 sessions for today's workshops focus on leadership by people affected by crisis. These are listed on the agenda. And to join, you have to go to the stage, select your chosen workshop, and click on the Zoom link on the right-hand side corner. And full instructions will be shared in the chat. After the workshops, we will see you back here on the main stage after the break to hear from our keynote speaker, Jane Connor, UN Victims' Rights Advocate at 2 o'clock. This is 2 o'clock European time. The stage will be open 5 minutes early so you can watch a brief video on ending violence against children, and that is kindly provided by a CHS Alliance member, Lutheran World Federation. So let me just see that we have the instructions for how to join the workshops. I can see the instructions for how to join the workshops. Okay, so there is an instruction. All plenary sessions will take place in the main stage where we are now, and all workshops are taking place on Zoom. Find your chosen workshop on the stage, tap from the reception page, and join via the Zoom link in the stage chat. So we will see you back here after the workshops and after the break. Okay.